All right, so this evening we are joined by the lovely Aspen Ellis, who is a seabird conservation biologist and PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Over the last 10 years, Aspen has worked countless seasons in the field, sat on climate panels, and created college level curriculum. And on top of that, answered many, many, many of my bird questions. After Aspen's talk this evening, I guarantee that you will not look at birds the same. Ladies and gentlemen, Aspen Ellis.
Oh. Favorite intro I've gotten in a moment. Cool. All right. I've been lucky today to be graced with a Google Drive full of Dylan's bird photos. And so this is really a glorified Dylan photo slideshow. I think that that's a great guiding train to take us through a bit of a tour of some of the birds that you have. And then as we're taking that tour, um, super happy to take questions along the way if there's birds that you've had questions about as you're out in the park. I'll be sharing a few general ornithology pieces of understanding spattered throughout, and then hopefully saving time for questions at the end. So very happy for this to be interactive. If folks want to come off of mute on Zoom and jump in, feel free, or to use the raise hands feature. And I'm sure we can get your questions answered as we go and afterward. Just framing us here, I want to start off by talking about bird diversity for a minute. This is a personal pet peeve of mine, which is why I'm starting here. But I think there's a big tendency to homogenize birds. I hear a lot of people assume similarity between birds that isn't necessarily there in reality. You can go into a pet store and see signs like, here we have gerbils and dogs and cats and rats and mice and birds. And just simplifying everything down to a unit in that way, I think means that people are not seeing a huge amount of the interest that comes with the diversity of birds that we actually do have. We've got over 11,000 species of birds currently identified. Understanding shifts every year as people redo bird taxonomy and genetics. But that's nearly double the number of species of mammals that we have. And I think that you can think about within that massive diversity of species, there being a huge amount of different life history strategies, behaviors, sizes, physiologies. There's very few good answers that are unitary to how does a bird do X, for example. It's going to vary a huge amount based on that bird's life history and ecology. In the park here, we have a lot of different birds that actually do capture a lot of that diversity. And so I'm excited to take you on a bit of a tour. If folks have questions about how birds are related to each other, I think that's really fascinating. And there's a few tools I can share at the end. We can do a bit of a scroll through one of the tools that I like for that. I'm not going to take you in a taxonomic order here because I don't think that that's the way that people actually really engage with birds in the world. I think typically you go into an environment and then are interested in the kind of birds that are interacting with each other there. So we'll go through a little bit more like that in the context of Henry Cowell tonight. So I'm going to start off with water birds here. I've tried to center this around birds that are fun to see in this kind of environment, and so that people will be having more questions about, or you might be seeing more frequently and interacting with in the park. Starting, because it's winter, with ducks. Here in the park, got a number of different duck species, and in the winter, that's our highest time for duck diversity, and they're the most fun to watch because they're in their breeding plumage right now. So we've got these hooded mergansers here, a male and female. I'm sure many of you have seen them on the rivers. They're a really small duck. Mergansers are a species of duck that is a fish eater, and so they have these really long, thin bills with little teeth along them, essentially, that let them dive down and catch fish. An important note about ducks is that you've kind of got these two different categories. You've got dabblers and you've got divers. And that's a really good way to get down the identification as you're doing it. As if you're wondering what kind of duck you're seeing and it pops underwater, you can cut your list in half and start with the diving ducks, essentially. So mergansers are in that diving camp since they are fish hunters. This is our other species of merganser that you'll commonly see in the park, which is the common merganser. Another male and female photo, thanks to Dylan. This is a larger species, still really beautiful in those breeding colors. You get the really crisp black and white, and a nice iridescent green head on the males there. There's also more like classic ducks, like the buffleheads that you'll start seeing in the winter as well. These are one of our smaller species. Beautiful bird, one of my favorites. These guys are also a diving duck. I haven't included many photos of the dabbling ducks you have here, but things like mallards are your most common. Ones where you'll see them flip up their tail in the air and just be going for pondweed and algae, especially in the near shore. That's more typical of the dappling duck behavior. Also in the environment here, you're going to see not a duck, but a coot pretty frequently. These are a fun one. This is a case of convergent evolution where pretty vastly unrelated species are filling very similar niches. So they have very similar ecological roles and therefore look more similar than they are taxonomically in reality. And so these guys are actually more closely related to cranes than they are to ducks, but are filling a very similar ecological niche. And one of our hints towards that you'll often see which have this like convergent evolution context is that some of their adaptations have come from a completely different direction. And so while they're still paddling through the water, instead of evolving webbed feet, the randomness of evolution actually gave these guys lobes. So if you pick them up, they got some funky little toes down there.
Yeah.
And those are one of like the ways that early ornithologists before the advent of genetics, for example, could see these things pop up and go, oh, something different is happening here if you have a completely different adaptation for the same thing. These ones are fun. You'll see them in really big groups in the winter, make a lot of noise. They ramble all over the place. You don't often see them out of water, but when you do, definitely do take a look at those massive feet. They're pretty funky to look at. If you ever see them breeding here, keep an eye out. They've got really funky little chicks, have bright orange and red heads that are nearly bald, just like little feathers sticking out. Funky. And dozens of them just following around behind there. A lot of fun to watch. Also got a good number of wading birds here, which I think are one of the most fun ones to engage with the public about, just because they're often really stationary and easy to see. I think that when you're trying to get people stoked about birds in the field, ones that you can actually sit and watch and like be peaceful with are the easiest way to connect with people. And so I often will focus on these if I'm taking people on first bird walks, for example, just because it's really easy if somebody's learning how to use binoculars, for example, to actually get them on the bird and enjoying it. There are some fun adaptations here to talk about as well. You've got a number of different heron species in the park, great blue heron and great egret being our biggest and most common. There's also green herons, which are a bit more secretive, but one of my favorite. And judging from this photo from Dylan, it sounds like they do nest here. So keeping your eye out for heron chicks, I'm sure would be very exciting in the summer season. Green herons are fun in that they're something that people will point out a lot because they shapeshift almost. And this is actually, I think, a really good example of something that a lot of birds do that confuses people, especially when they're new to birds, is that people don't really understand how bird anatomy actually moves and works in a very different way from what mammal anatomy does. And so these are the same individual moments apart. Birds in this case, green herons are one of the best examples, but all birds actually have double the number of neck vertebrae that we do. And so a lot of action can happen in this region. They really do seem to shapeshift a lot, especially based on the fact that not only do they have these sort of very mobile necks and legs compared to a pretty constrained torso, each feather is also controlled by its own muscle. And so as you're seeing birds move and change shape, it's because they're able to like completely fluff up and take down their feathers with a lot more control than mammals are. Like, certainly we have follicular muscles that will help us shiver, like the goosebumps feeling. But birds have a lot more conscious control over it as they're putting up their crest or putting down their crest, or if they're trying to puff up to stay warm. You'll see people go, oh, well, that couldn't possibly be a bird, or the same bird that I thought it was. It looks totally different. And that's just something that I think people get used to as they're learning bird anatomy. Here's just a fun cat scan of that experience. You can tuck a whole neck in to those feathers, pretty much no problem. And it just about disappears. Always a fun one.
Are they connected differently, like each piece, or is that like the same as a human? Because I'm thinking like there's no way like we could get our necks to do that, or is it just because there's so many?
It's a great question. I'm sure it varies. I think that there's probably a lot more like side to side rotation in a lot of species, like with owls. I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that there are just double the number of vertebrae, but there is also a huge amount more mobility between those vertebrae than we have. Big time. Yep. Cool. The other freshwater species that you'll often see here is the double-crested cormorant. This one is a surprise for some people, especially in coastal areas like ours, where they're more familiar with seeing cormorants in the sea. This species of cormorant is also found on the coast, but they aren't nearly as common out there in Santa Cruz as the more dominant Brandt's cormorant and pelagic cormorant that you'll see if you go down natural bridges, for example. And so this is a different species than all of those ones that are breeding on the coastline right off of West Cliff, for example. These guys prefer, in many cases, freshwater or coastal areas. They will migrate along the coast, but are a lot more common and easy to see up here. They're our biggest cormorant in the area. They are, like all seabirds, a pretty social breeder. And so in their breeding and roosting colonies, you'll see a whole bunch congregate in one big tree in what's called a rookery. And that can be a pretty fun and stinky sight. These guys are great. Another diving water bird where they're just so graceful underwater. When you see them do that big like wing spread in the sunshine, that's because as a diving adaptation for cormorants, they actually don't have waterproofing on their feathers in order to make sure that the air actually doesn't get trapped underneath. They can dive more easily because they do get wet. And so they have to frequently dry themselves back out in order to thermoregulate. So they spend a huge amount of time basking in the sun. Yeah, cool. Big time. Another honorable water bird here for Henry Cowell is the belt kingfisher. This is obviously taxonomically not similar to any of the birds I just showed, but is a really fun one to point people on by the river. I would say for everyone here to get familiar with the belted kingfisher song, I'm going to see if I could just play it on my phone. It's the most easy way to do this with our audio tech situation here. But I will way more often hear a belted kingfisher before I see one, and then it's a lot easier to spot. It's a really distinctive dry rattle that just sort of echoes across the water. And if you hear that, you'll often see one just dipping back and forth across the river. I'm sure many of you will recognize this one. Yeah, yeah. So as soon as you clock that, it's a lot easier to spot them. There's other birds that make a rattling call like this, but this is a pretty like dry mechanical sound. There's almost no like musicality to it. And once you catch on to it, it's pretty easy to get.
Does it hunt or fish from its perch?
It will, yeah. You'll also see them do a slight hover above the water. They'll fly out to the middle of the river, almost like a kestrel a little, and pause for a moment before they go down. But they're stationary. They're what's called a flycatchers, and these guys both do something called sallying, where they have a central like foraging location and they'll venture out and back to that central location a lot. And so if you do get like a good kingfisher fishing area, it can be fun to just like set up and watch them because they'll often hang out for a little bit. Cool. Take a bit of a tour of some birds of prey here. Again, this is a fun one, I think, to get people on. People often like will get excited about birds via birds of prey because they're so charismatic. And Henry Cowell has a good diversity of them, so I think they're a fun one to spend some time on. One of the more common ones that you will see here in this wooded habitat in California are the red-shouldered hawk. Here we've got a photo of a juvenile and an adult. While this adult photo is shady, certainly when they're in bright sunlight, the distinction between that like bright red chest and the checkering on their back is pretty distinctive. They're a reasonably small hawk. They're not huge. They hunt mostly in forests, and so you'll actually see them in the trees more often. This is another great call to learn. Let's do this one. Yeah, they're really squeaky. There we go. Yeah. In the summer especially, they just don't shut up. They are talkative. The red tail is actually what almost everyone thinks of as the bald eagle song. And so any movie where you hear a bald eagle, it is actually a red-tailed hawk because bald eagles sound a little embarrassing. It's un-American. The classic red-tailed hawk is the like eagle scream. The bald eagle sound is much more similar to the red shoulder. It's just kind of an annoying, whiny. Yes. Yeah. But when you hear that really distinctive call outside, it's a good point to look up for a red shoulder or a red-tailed hawk. Again, mostly sticking to Dylan's photos here. So this one, unfortunately, doesn't show the most distinctive red-tailed hawk characteristic. But when you do see the light shining through them, especially when they're soaring above, it's easy to pinpoint that beautiful red tail. If they're sitting down like this, the easiest way to tell them apart from the red-shouldered hawk is that for both the juveniles and the adults here, the patterning goes all the way down the chest. And for a red-tailed hawk, especially for some of the mutations you see more around here, you get a pretty distinctive like belly band is their defining characteristic. They have like a belt of speckling and a pretty bright white chest, and that is a really good way to tell them apart. These guys are a little bit bigger. All hawks also vary a good amount in size between the sexes. The females are a lot larger than the males. They actually will do what's called like resource segregation between the sexes. And so females and males will eat different prey. And that means that they're often able to more easily inhabit the same territories without competing with one another during the breeding season. And so they'll sometimes be different of like several hundred grams in size between the two. And that means that I think especially as like you're getting used to clocking size in the field, it can be jarring, I think, to see that distinctive difference and realize that they're the same species. But just know that that's normal. One of the smaller hawks you guys have in the park are the sharp-shinned hawks. We've got two photos here. I imagine you also have Cooper's hawks, which are a slightly larger related species. Very hard to tell apart, especially as you're sort of like getting used to the distinctions, but there are a few characteristics that you can pretty easily consistently tell. One is the shape of the tail is a lot flatter, more steady on the sharp-shinned here. So you can see I haven't got a comparison photo for you, but it's pretty much a gentle curve along. The outer tail feathers on a Cooper's are much, much shorter. And so even if their tail's folded from the front, you can see that distinction. And in flight as well, you can see it's a much more rounded tail. Coopers are a lot larger. My favorite field mark for these two is that sharpshins look cute and Coopers look angry. And if you take any photo, you can pretty much tell that that's true. I like both of these guys a lot. Both of these, in contrast to the two hawks I showed in the last two slides, are in a different genus called Accipitor. These are bird hawks, and so they mostly hunt birds in the forest, and you'll see them mostly in undercover. They're much more agile. They're good at flying between trees very quickly and catching small songbirds, whereas red shoulders and red-tailed hawks are mostly mammal hunters. They'll go for squirrels and rabbits primarily. Have to include a falcon photo here. Absolutely a bird of prey, not at all related to a hawk. Falcons are actually now understood to be more closely related to hummingbirds than they are to other hawks. So another case of convergent evolution here, which is pretty interesting. I love kestrels. It's really fun to be able to see them. They're often in the like edge habitat, open areas near fields on the edge of forest. If you get a good catch on what a kestrel looks like, they're one of my favorite birds to spot while driving. They're really easy to catch on California lines, especially like down by Santa Barbara. You can see one almost every mile. These guys go for mice, grasshoppers very frequently. They're going for pretty small prey, and they're a fun one.
We have falcons?
Or a falcon. Cool. Owls. Also really a fun species to be able to see when you can see them. The best times for this are going to be very early morning and right at dusk. You've got a couple of species here. I imagine even more than I'm showing. Great horns are the most distinctive. I'm sure everyone knows what a great horn sounds like. It's that very classic owl hoot. Barn owls are also excellent to be able to see. They're so beautiful and iconic. Almost look like they float as they fly. That's really characteristic of owls. They have very, very lightweight bodies and very big wings. And so they look very buoyant in flight compared to hawks, which look heavier. There's another fun adaptation for flight here. Because these are nocturnal predators, they are adapted for silent hunting so that they can actually hear their prey as they're flying and the noise of their wings doesn't drown out what might be a mouse chewing down in the grass below. And so part of that is that like very light flight. Their wings are very big compared to their body size. The other bit of that is an actual adaptation on their feathers. So these are two close-ups, I think, of a maybe barred owl and a barn owl, and then just a regular like non-owl feather. And you can see the edge here. You have a huge amount of softness. Everything is very fluttered and gentle on the edge of an owl feather, and it just moves through the air much more quietly than the hard edge of another feather. And this is a fun one if people are around on trails and find one. It's really easy to tell if you've got an owl feather or not because it's really soft to the touch. Though, of course, everyone knows you're not allowed to take them. They are fun to look at. Cool. Moving on from birds of prey, wanted to tell you a little bit about the hummingbirds you have here because they're one of the most, again, charismatic and fun to watch. Annas are the most common, but in the summer you'll be able to see Allens as well, which are very beautiful, sort of bright orange compared to the Annas. There are a couple of things I want to point out here that I think are really fun to watch out for. One, aside from just like, again, foraging on flowers, like being stunning, is their really distinctive flight display. This is a territorial and mating display that they will do. And when you hear the sound they make when they do it, you'll start seeing it constantly. This is, I think, called like the J flight loop, maybe. Here, I'm going to find the noise of the specific flight sound. One moment. Got to flip back between my tabs here. Okay, let's see if this plays. That really high-pitched peak sounds very much like a ground squirrel. It's actually the tail feathers of the male hummingbird as they dip at the bottom point of that dive. So right at the base there, that's the tail feathers moving through the air really quickly. That's at a very clear, distinct pitch. And they do it multiple times in a row. So the first time you hear that and then some hummingbird chattering after, look up and around, and it's normally like the most open, clear area next to you. You can see them doing laps. Really fun to watch.
Okay.
Get people on.
Are any of the, sorry, back to hummingbirds.
That's all right.
Are any of the noises that a hummingbird makes coming from its mouth, or is it all in the feathers?
They are. That's the only noise that's in the feathers.
Okay.
Everything else is very much coming from their mouths. And there's a lot of like hummingbird chattering that happens. I can play that on my phone too. And you'll often hear them, I don't know why they do it, but they'll chatter with their mouths right after they do this call, typically. So you will hear both. Yeah. So not super distinctive noises, but that part of the flight pattern is a really good one to catch. There's a few other birds that do that as well. If you ever hear mourning doves take off, it's also their feathers moving through the air that is the sound that you hear. You can sometimes hear their wings actually smack behind them too as they're doing that really powerful flight in the takeoff. It's pretty cool to watch. While we're on hummingbirds, another fun like bird fact to start clocking as you're looking at birds pretty closely is the different ways that birds produce color in their feathers. And they've actually got sort of two main camps and a few different methods within that. Birds have a combination of both pigment colors and structural colors that they are using within their feathers to make a whole rainbow of different hues. The two pigments that I think people are more like intrinsically familiar with, given a mammal background, are carotenoids and melanin. Melanin are responsible, like they are in humans, for all of the blacks and browns and grays that you'll see. So here on this Townsend's warbler, everything that's black or gray here. So all of their face markings is from a melanin-based pigment. Carotenoids, humans also get to some extent. If you've ever met somebody who had too many carrots as a kid and their palms turned orange, that's a high amount of carotenoids in their system as well. But birds take advantage of that to make really bright yellow and orange hues in their feathers. So all of the yellow on this bird is diet-based as well. That's coming from bug shells, berries. Everything is like a good nutrition is what's making a bird yellow. The same is true for any bright red, any color like that. Structural colors are a lot of fun with birds, and there's two types. One is just responsible for pretty much all blues, and the other is iridescence, where you can get a whole bunch of different colors from that. Structural colors mean that this isn't pigment at all. It's just a structure of the feather that is hitting the light in the right way to produce that blue color. And that means that if you take a blue jay feather and you get it wet or you put it in shade, it won't look blue in the same way. That blue color will actually shift because it's altering the structure in the feather. The cool thing about that is that in order to get green, you actually combine the structural color of blue within the feather with the carotenoid pigment in different pieces of the feather. And so if you zoom in small enough, you can like see the blue chunks and the yellow chunks blending to make the green in their feathers. Really fun. The iridescence here, this is like a micro version of a peacock feather. That is effectively tiny little bits of the feather that are essentially acting like mirrors. They're really flattened down to reflect the light. And that's how you get those really crazy colors on, for example, a hummingbird, where one patch of the feathers is black, and then right next to it, this really intense reflective color. And that's just the angle of light between you and the feather. And again, if you see a hummingbird in the shade or in the rain, you might see it look completely drab entirely, but you see it in the sunshine and it looks just like a glowing gem. A lot of fun. There's a few other like secret feather pigments and structures, but they're all in parrots in different countries. So I won't focus on those today. Cool. Woodpeckers. Another Henry Cowell classic. I had to dedicate a slide to every woodpecker essentially, since these are a really great one for this type of habitat. I'm sure you guys could probably at this point tell me more about acorn woodpeckers than I could tell you about acorn woodpeckers, since they're such a charismatic part of the park. I love going up to the Overlook Tower and the Sandhills and looking at that cash tree that's up there and that family of acorn woodpeckers. One of my favorite spots in town. Oh no,
They cut it? Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
The chipmunks have a blast.
There are more nearby, it's okay. Yeah, they're gonna be fine. They're gonna move on to a different tree. But the cool thing about acorn woodpecker trees is that they will use them for generations. And so woodpeckers, or acorn woodpeckers specifically, are one of the few examples of cooperative familial breeders in the bird world. And so all of the woodpeckers on that tree are likely related to some extent. They will often have like between like 1 and 5 females and like 1 and 8 males that are all actually breeding within a family unit like that with each other and God knows what sort of structures. But then they will have up to 5 generations of young from those birds then helping and not being part of the breeding. And so they will stick around and then help their parents produce young, thereby like increasing their own genetic contribution to the population in that way. So it's a very different like breeding structure than what most people hear about in introductory ecology classes. But they're a really fun one for that, where you can really clearly see that there is a family unit right there with their home cache tree that they're using. Watching them move, as we know, the acorns from hole to hole as they dry out and shift and fall. It's a full-time job as far as I can tell. But they are a really great one to spend time with people on. Honorable mention for the sapsucker here, just because I know they're a lot of fun to see up in the park. Seeing sapsucker wells is one of my favorite things. Sapsuckers are a slightly different adapted woodpecker than some of the others, where they will like drill out these little shallow holes in the bark that fill with sap that they will eat, but they will also eat any bugs that are caught in it as well. And that means that they're also something that attracts other species too, because you'll often see hummingbirds then coming in like picking off the gnats that are actually in the sapsucker wells. So they sort of make habitat for other species in some ways. They're a fun one. Other very classic woodpeckers to see are the hairy and downy woodpeckers. This is another one of those like very similar pairs that can be hard to tell apart in the field. They've got 2 different pitches of songs. The hairy is a lot lower pitched than the downy. In the field, if you're just looking at them, hairy is a larger woodpecker, and the easiest way to tell them apart is the length of the bill. What I was taught is if you like took the bill off and flipped it around, if it passes past the behind of the eye, that's a hairy woodpecker. If it doesn't make it that far, it's a downy. So you can sort of see there just the rough difference in size. Not the best photo for it, but that's the main way you can tell. Again, downies look cute is another one of the features that people can more easily catch. And then, of course, the really charismatic pileated woodpecker. This is one of my favorites. This is the largest woodpecker we have left in North America, now that the ivory bill woodpecker is unfortunately extinct. Though you will hear some truthers out there saying otherwise. This one is a really fun one to see in the park. So massive, it glows red in the sun. It has that beautiful white patch on its wings as it's flying through the undergrowth. It has a really loud and distinctive song. And this is another one to know if you don't already. It's very similar to the flicker call, if you know that one. It's a like laugh sound, but you can really distinctively tell them apart just because of how much reverberation comes off of the pileated. It almost sounds like it's echoing through the woods when you hear it. Always worth trying to get on that if you hear it. It's a beautiful one to see. Another fun bird adaptation here, if the video will play. We've got this photo of a pileated just going to town on a log. A lot of people wonder how they do that. It is a huge amount of impact to put on their heads. They've got a reinforced skull to be able to handle it. I worked in a museum for about 10 to 15 years, like, making study skins. And so have got intimately familiar with what woodpecker brains look like, unfortunately. But it is a highly reinforced and very muscular structure that they've adapted to be able to withstand that amount of pressure. And the other really cool thing that I've included a photo of here is that once they're actually in the bark, getting grubs out, you run into another challenge of like wanting to actually get far enough away from where a bill is to get the food. And they've got this crazy adaptation where their tongue is actually long enough that it wraps all the way around the back of their head, like dips into their nostril from above. And so it can stick out of their tongue or out of their mouth almost like double of the length of their head just by wrapping all of that extra back up around their skull. Really funky to see. Goes again. Alrighty. While we're here, I also wanted to briefly talk about some fun foot adaptations in birds to handle a whole bunch of different habitats. Any songbird that you see is this very classic like chicken foot shape, and it's a dactyl. They've got thumbs in the back and then 3 toes on front. They've essentially lost their 4th toe in all birds. But birds can then adapt and have adapted in multiple different ways to be able to handle different habitats. Owls and woodpeckers both have flipped their 4th finger back so that in owl's case, they have a broader angle to catch prey. They've like extended their catch radius. And for woodpeckers, it means they're really good at moving up and down on bark because they've got that 4-point contact. There's a few others that you don't see as often. One of my favorites is pamperdactyl, which is what chimney swifts have. Here, probably white-throated swifts if you see them. All 4 toes in front so that they can cling onto the edges of chimneys and cliffs. Really nice. They don't use their feet for anything else, but for that purpose, it's really good. All right. From here, I have done most of the birds that are really easy to see and like get the public onto, right? I'm assuming you get a lot of your questions, and folks are probably asking more questions when they're sort of newer to looking at birds. I think they're the easier ones to spot and a lot of fun to talk about. There's a lot of diversity in there. If we think about the whole evolutionary structure of birds, you've got, I believe it's about 5,000 species up until this point. Like, we've filtered through the taxonomy to get to this point, which is the songbirds, and we've gone through diversity-wise about 5,000 species. From songbirds on, you have another 6,000 species in this one order. So this is a hugely diverse order of a lot of tiny birds. There's some variation to get some bigger. For example, the common raven is still a songbird. But the vast, yes, yeah, that is surprising. Kingfishers are not, but once you like hit songbirds, there's a few characteristics that like are pretty easy to catch between them. The big one being that they have an adaptation that means that they can sing much more beautiful songs than most other birds. And so those really complex like wren songs where you're hearing multiple pitches moving back and forth with each other very quickly is an adaptation in the bird's voice box or the syrinx that lets them much more complexly produce song. There are some songbirds that I think there's 2 clades of songbirds. One, their songs are genetically inherited. That's also true for pretty much all non-songbirds, but a lot of songbirds actually learn song socially, either from their parents or from other birds around them as they're in their youth. So for that reason, I have not spent as much focus on the songbirds for this talk. I think songbirds are like a birding level 2 to me. They move really quickly, and in habitat like Henry Cowell, they're up really high. And so they're not as much fun for people when they're getting into birds because they're craning their necks back and they need binoculars to be able to enjoy them. But especially with spring coming up, it's worth brushing up on some of the songbirds.
Hello.
I think she's frozen.
I hear nothing from
Quick, write in the chat. What's everybody's favorite songbird? But I mean, person wise, I'm thinking Dean Martin, Frankie Sinatra, old blue eyes.
Thanks for the interlude. We're trying to figure out why it's frozen.
Can you guys hear me now? Awesome. Okay, my Wi-Fi dropped, but I will reshare my screen and we'll get back up and going. Desktop too. Gorgeous. Okay. So brief songbird slideshow here. Again, happy to take questions, and I'll save enough time for back and forth at the end too. Corvids are one of the more distinctive songbirds that you can get in the park. These are your crows, ravens, and jays. They're some of your more charismatic species. They're certainly a lot more present and easy to see. They interact with people a lot. Many ways, they're very intelligent species. A lot of these guys are great problem solvers. They're very social. They enjoy like playing tricks on other species. They are social enough that they are engaging with mirth in a way that's interesting to watch. Crows and ravens here are some of your more common. You obviously have a lot of ravens up here, but crows should be around as well. Reasonably easy to tell apart once you get the hang of it. The biggest difference is the size, but you can also see like how extended and long the raven's tail is compared to crows, which are much shorter and flatter. In flight, the crow's tail is like a small semicircle, and the raven almost has a spade shape. They've got a much longer set of middle tail feathers. And then you've got a much heavier bill on the raven. And in the sunshine, you can see just like how much iridescence they have on them too compared to crows. Jays as well are one of the more social, loud, active songbird species that you'll be interacting with. These guys are related. They're very intelligent and really easy to spot. So they're a lot of fun. We've got Steller's jays and scrub jays as two of the more common jays in the park.
Does the population of them change in the county in the last 10, 20 years?
I have to imagine so. I don't know specifically for each of these species, but I can tell you that corvids generally, like for many species, are doing really well at adapting alongside urbanization, especially crows. Crows really benefit from being alongside people. They're great scavengers. They can benefit from the trash that we put out. They benefit from the heat that our cities put off. You'll see crows in Midwestern areas, for example, gathering in like roosts of thousands and thousands to move into cities at night to stay warm. And so I think a lot of these species are better at adapting to the rapidly changing environment that we're producing. I don't know locally how that would have changed their distributions within the park. Ravens are a lot less linked to urbanization than crows are. I do have some friends at the university actually who are studying like how urbanization gradients are changing, how those distributions move, for example, along the coastline. Their scavenging rates, for example, in response to like coastal human use, dogs on beaches and that kind of thing. And we definitely are seeing shifts, but that is true for pretty much every species at this point. A few thrushes here. We have got your common American robin. This is the most common thrush you'll see, less common in California than throughout a lot of the rest of the US, but a really beautiful bird. Not actually related to the European robin at all. Both just have red breasts, and so got named the same thing. Another thrush that you'll see a lot of is the Western bluebird. So these are actually a very close relative of robins. These alongside with Swainson's thrushes, varied thrushes, any of the more secretive thrushes you might see in the undergrowth in the redwoods, are all pretty closely related and all have really beautiful songs. So it's worth, especially in the spring when birds are singing, learning some of those thrush songs and being able to catch them. Varied thrushes have one of the most haunting, like alien-like of the songs that you can hear. And then Swainson's are just a really beautiful, complex song as well. But the ones that you'll see the most of are the robin and bluebird, which are a lot less secretive than those other species.
Oh.
Black phoebes, one of my favorites. These actually, excuse me, skipped a category. These are not technically songbirds. They're right before the songbird switch. These are small flycatcher. Another one of those sallying predators like I talked about, where they will find like one good branch or one good piece of grass or fence post and go out and back catching bugs on individual trips constantly. So they're a lot of fun to get people on and get people watching. Another fun one for me in the park are brown creepers. They're a really good treat to see. They're very sneaky. They're about the size of a little mouse. They are also thing that clings to the bark. So your categories for that are going to be woodpecker, nuthatch, or creeper. And the difference between creepers and nuthatches is that nuthatches can go down and up. Creepers can only go up. You won't ever see a nuthatch switch and climbing back down. Really hard to spot them, but if you learn the song, you'll start hearing them a lot more. They're often up really high and somehow always on the other side of a tree trunk from you. But they are really beautiful to catch. Here, I'll do. It's a, I think, very, very high-pitched, quite quiet song. I'm sure that most of you know about the app Merlin, and I hope we're heavily using it in the park. But those are fun. Having that app going and just like learning some of those bird songs, especially as we go into spring, is a great way to start catching some of these things that are harder to see and then get your eyes on a lot more birds more quickly. California thrashers are one of my favorites. We have a lot of them around here. Beautiful photo by Dylan here. This is great. One of my fun facts about California thrashers for you is that this is the species that defined the concept of the ecological niche, if you've heard of that. The like foundational paper for ecology that described the niche is based on the California thrasher. If you're ever looking for a great read, the way that biologists were using the English language in the 1800s, it's a real treat. My favorite quote from that is the entire paper is just describing what the California thrasher is up to in great enough detail. They were like, okay, this is an ecological concept, like the ways that this species interacts with its natural world, enough to delineate where it is and isn't, sort of how that concept got formed. And the quote is, "His muscular thighs betoken powers of running." Very nice. Very descriptive. Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of flavor in there. But I think what they're essentially trying to say is that the bird spends a lot of time on the ground and can move pretty quickly. It's a couple more that are fun to catch and easy to get people on are the chickadee and titmouse, which are pretty closely related. Got a lot of different species of chickadees and titmouse throughout the US. And so I'm sure you have a lot of travelers to the park who are familiar with related species from other regions. Here, I think primarily we have oak titmice, maybe some juniper titmice as well in some areas throughout California. And then our chickadees are our beautiful classic chestnut-backed variety. But a lot of people are very familiar with these two birds and their similar species throughout pretty much every region. You could find a titmouse and a chickadee. Another fun one with spring coming up is the red-crowned kinglet. They often do not look like this. This is another example of those mussels being able to move feathers in ways that are fun. And so 90% of the time that red crown is completely hidden underneath other green feathers. But if they get riled up or angry, they'll pop those feathers right up and show you that ruby crown. Really tiny, often move in pretty small flocks with other like warblers and stuff like that. And so if you see any little songbirds moving up above you, it's often worth checking because it's often like 5 different species that are mixed in there. You can find some fun stuff. A few sparrows for you. People often get frustrated with sparrows when they start birding because they're all small and brown. I think there's a lot to love and that they're worth learning. Some of your more distinctive ones that are more common here are the song sparrow, which is this one. They've got a really beautiful song and they sing a lot. And so once you learn that song, you will see them all the time. The dark-eyed junco is also a related species, a sparrow as well, are obviously very common here on the trails. This is actually the same species across pretty much all of the US, but they have very different color morphs. And so I think this is called the pink-sided junco from that very slight pink tinting here. In Michigan, where I'm from, we know them as the slaty-backed junco, and they look totally different. They're all pretty much black all over, but there are just those color morphs across different regions. They're fun to catch as you travel. The towhee is another classic. This is another relative of the sparrows and a really fun one that's easier to see in the park. They spend a lot of time on the ground. You can often hear them before you see them just kicking up leaf litter, rustling around in the bushes. If you sit for a moment, it's normally a towhee. A fun one to catch. And then I'm going to end on my favorite species here, where I hold you too long, which is the Pacific wren. They are a classic, and I will end with that song since we all love it. And speaking of songs that just really echo through the woods, this is, I think, one of my favorite places to hear them just because it really carries. Beautiful. Gorgeous. All right.
Thank you.
Absolutely.